Hi, everyone. Welcome to Startup School with Startup Canada and Concierge Service. Startup Canada is a program of Startup Canada, a webinar series dedicated to the professional development of Canada's entrepreneurs. My name is Matt Allen. I am a photojournalist and volunteer with Startup Canada. I'm your host for today, and I'll introduce our featured guest in just a few moments. Today's Startup School topic is Slaying the Dragons, specifically pitching to investors, and it is presented by CONCIERGE, a Government of Canada program delivered by the National Research Council of Canada Industrial Research Assistance Program. Through a team of specialized innovation advisors, CONCIERGE provides free, customized guidance to help you access the most relevant programs you need to grow your business. Now, our featured guest is Erik Kaas, an advisor at Concierge Service based in Ottawa. Before taking on his current position, Erik has had plenty of experience in product management, specializing in everything from product strategy to development and marketing. He has worked in executive positions with software startups and established high-tech companies alike. His recent roles include serving as VP of Products at Quinny, VP of Product Management at Sage Software, and Director of Product Management and Product Marketing at Engrain Corporation. We'll start today's session with a presentation from Erik, and then open the floor for Q&A. And you can ask questions at any time using the hashtag StartupSchool on Twitter or the comment section on YouTube. So without further delay, please welcome to our program, Erik. Erik, we're thrilled to have you here today.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be here this morning and afternoon. I'm actually based out of Vancouver, so it's still early morning for us here. But I'm ready to go for the presentation. So let me share the PowerPoint. There we go. I think it's all up and running here. So as an innovation advisor with the Concierge Service, we deal a lot with startups, and one of their big issues is, of course, to get funding. And in addition to funding from the government, which we help them with, they're very often also talking actively to investors, trying to get them to invest in their startup. And often that means that they have to do a presentation, which is called a pitch, to those investors. And we often help them trying to pull together the content. So for this webinar, I pulled together a presentation to kind of go over some of the tips and best practices for putting together presentations to investors, to try to get them to know who you are, know what you're doing, and hopefully get them to share your vision and go along for the ride through an investment. So the presentation is kind of set up in three parts. First I'll go talk a little bit about who you're pitching to, because there's going to be some different scenarios that the content is going to be different for. Then, of course, the bulk of the presentation is going to be about what do you need to include in your pitch, what content do you need to create, and what topics do you need to cover to make sure that the investors have a good understanding of your venture. And then finally, there is an art to pitching. So we'll go a little bit on how do you present your pitch in front of an audience or in front of an individual, and provide some general presentation tips there. So after that, we will definitely open the floor for Q&A. If you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer those. So the first thing is to basically know your audience of who are you going to be pitching to. The bulk of my presentation will be based on doing more of a public pitch to a larger group of investors, which is the most common scenario that we see where companies are struggling to get the content together. But in many cases, you do have an opportunity to talk to individuals, whether that's at a conference, whether that's in a meeting, whether that's just bumping into people at events or other activities. And the first thing that you need to be able to do is to very concisely tell them what it is that you're actually doing. And that's often referred to as the elevator pitch. So the goal of an elevator pitch is to introduce what you do as a company and make that very succinct and very easy to understand. All right, and this is really 101 in pitching, being able to have that ready to go And it's called an elevator pitch because the length should be about 30 to 90 seconds. And it should be something that you can tell somebody if you're in a relatively short elevator ride with them. Right? And of course, since it's only a very brief first introduction, typically the next step would be to network with people and to get them to schedule hopefully some follow-up meetings where you can do a more detailed pitch to them about your company. All right, so brief introduction, get people to understand what you do, and then follow up with them for more details. So let's have a closer look at the content of an elevator pitch, where you need to cover the basics of introducing your company to the audience or to an individual. And there's a bit of a sort of a standard way of doing that. Of course, this is not written in stone. You can be flexible around this. But as a starting step, you could try to come up with this kind of format. So the first sentence is really, we are a company, right? Your company name. And we make or we provide a service or we sell your solution. So again, keep it very simple, keep it very short. We make product X. And then you need to say who you make it for, right? Identify who your target customers are that you are trying to address, right? And this needs to be fairly specific so that the investor has a very clear idea of who you are going to target with this solution. And then it goes to the problem that you're solving, because people are only going to buy your product if it solves a specific problem for them, right? So these target customers that you have, they need to solve a specific problem. And unlike, and this is where you list your competitors, unlike my competitors who do something different than what we do, our solution has a very unique aspect to it that becomes our value proposition, right? So we are a company that makes a certain product targeting certain customers who need to solve a specific problem. And unlike our main competitors, we have a very unique solution for that. So this is the general format that you need to fill out. And of course, it goes very specific to your company. But let's look at an example that I found. And this is for the car-to-go service, a co-op type service that hopefully is in your city. But if not, there might be some similar services in your city, like Zipcar or something like that. But the way they've done it, they said, we are car-to-go, and we provide a car rental service for mobile urban citizens. Right, so they make it very specific to urban. It has to be within a relatively small city or small footprint within a city. And these mobile urban citizens need a car for short trips, but they don't want to own a car. Right, so they want to have the flexibility of getting a car for relatively short trips. And again, here they're differentiating themselves a little bit from longer term trips, longer term travel. So their competition is rental car companies and taxis. So unlike rental car companies and taxis, the car-to-go service offers per minute car rental that allows customers to use and leave cars wherever they are for less than 50 cents per minute. So again, the trick is to make this specific to your company, to your product, and to your solution. And it takes a lot of work. You need to actually work on this. It's not something you're just going to write up in 5 minutes. Because you really need to think about what you do. And I've got a few tips here for the elevator pitch as you work on that. So first of all, it has to be in plain English. So don't use any jargon that's specific to your industry. Very important, because you need to be able to use this elevator pitch in any circumstance, even if an investor or the person you're pitching to is not familiar with your industry. So use plain English. Avoid any specific technical terms that people may not know. The other thing is you need to keep it as short as possible. So you don't want to use any superfluous words. So every word needs to actually add value to what you're saying. Right? So you have to be really careful to not make it too long and too wordy. Just scratch any word that you think doesn't really add specific value to what you're saying in that short 60-second-ish elevator pitch. Then once you start using this, you really need to memorize it, right? And that comes with practice. It's your business, it's your day-to-day activity. You're full into this. so it shouldn't be too difficult. But you kind of need to get the flow and the specific wording memorized, because otherwise you start shifting it around, you start adding some words, and it's going to lose its power. And then the last tip is that this is going to be a living thing, right? You're gonna come up with your first elevator pitch. You're going to talk to people about it, and you're going to get feedback, right? You're gonna hear them ask questions. You're going to hear them drill down into certain aspects, and that's going to give you a sense of what things people care about and what things are clear versus what things are either not important or unclear. So you adapt, right? Every time you do this, you're going to learn to either add a word or change a word or change the intonation. So practice it and then test it in real life and keep updating it. Keep working on this. This really becomes the one thing that you'll always have in your back pocket to describe your company. So that's kind of the elevator pitch. That's the starting point that you need to have. So the next level is going to be more of a full investor pitch, right? Where you're going to go either in front of one individual investor or a group of potential investors, right? And the goal of that pitch is not to get money. It's actually to find out which of these investors are going to be interested in your company and are going to want to have a much more detailed sit down, specific drill down, due diligence to understand what it is that you do. All right, so the goal is to find out who is interested, and then again, I keep following up with them. Now, one of the big challenges with an investor pitch is that because you are the entrepreneur, you do this day to day, this is your full life, you know a lot about your company and about the market and about your product, but you really need to try to capture this in something that's maybe 10 slides maximum, that you can present in about 5 to 7 minutes max, because people tend to talk too much about their enterprise, and if you talk too much about it, you're going to lose interest. You may give away information that the investor does not like and lose interest, and it just too time consuming, right? So a typical pitch, you're going to have either 5 to 15 minutes typically to present, but always try to present shorter than that, because you want to leave time at the end for questions and answers. Because if people in the audience ask questions, that tells you that they're interested in your company, right? So you don't want to give away all of the detailed information. You want to give the basic information and then start interacting with the audience to gauge interest and to provide information on what you have in that Q&A session, interactive, right? So you see there that it says 10 slides maximum, but you have to have what's called backup slides, right? So you can have a deck of 30 slides with lots of details about additional information, but you go to those slides if and when somebody asks a question about it. All right, so keep it short. And here's a couple of testimonies from people that know a lot more than I do about successful pitching. And Guy Kawasaki is a guru that worked for Apple and has helped many startups. And everybody probably knows Y Combinator, a big incubator in Silicon Valley. And these testimonies again emphasize shorter is better, right? Because you need to capture the attention and the interest. You don't need to provide a full blueprint of what it is that you're exactly doing. So keep that in mind every time you're working on your investor deck. Less is more. So with that said, let's go into some of the details of what to include in your pitch. All right, so this is the bigger investor pitch. And first of all, I always recommend people that when you get up, you just give your elevator pitch, right? So in about 60 seconds, 90 seconds, you're going to tell people what you do very succinctly so that they get that initial idea of what it is that you do. You get their mindset framed, right? And then after that, you go into a more detailed presentation that's going to go into details such as what specific problem are you addressing, how big is the market, that you're addressing, who are the competitors and how they compare to you, So you're basically going to start adding a little bit more details in some of those key points that are within your elevator pitch. And I'm going to go into each of these to provide a bit more details on what it is that investors are looking for to get the information they need to make a decision on whether or not to follow up with you to discuss your venture in more details. All right, but always just get up there, introduce yourself, and introduce your company with that elevator pitch that you have crafted. All right, and then go into additional slides with these details. So once you've done your elevator pitch, now people know kind of the market you're targeting, the problem you're solving, but you want to drill down a bit more into the problem that you're specifically addressing. And the best way to do that is to actually describe the market opportunity through a story. Like I call it a use case scenario, an example of in a day-to-day life, what would one of your target customers encounter when they're trying to use existing solutions, right? So typically your competitors or typically an alternative solution, right? And what are the main challenges that they run into using that, which leads then into, of course, you having identified that market opportunity, right? And you also need to make it very clear why that has not been solved by any of your existing competitors, right? And why now is the right time to provide a solution, right? Is it based on a certain technology? Is there a certain momentum in the market that is making customers more interested in alternatives? And this is where you want to share your unique insights in the market, right? Investors are always going to look for people that know something that others don't know about a certain market, and that becomes the opportunity where you have some unique value and unique solution to provide a solution that people are going to be excited about, right? So share that insight, share your experience with the investors to let them know that you really understand and have deep insights into this market and into this problem that you're trying to solve. And then you need to go and actually tell them how are you going to uniquely solve this, right? And this is really the essence of typically your solution, where you need to describe what it is that you've either built or that you plan to build. If it's based on a technology, you need to talk about that. If it's physical, you could do a demo, but I say here sometimes you have to be really careful because the investors are not your customers, right? They are not there to use your product. They just want to understand your product, right? So you're not teaching them or selling them on your product specifically. You're just trying to show them and make it very clear what it is that your product does that is unique, right? So a very quick, simple demo. If it's impressive, if it's a good product and it looks good, you can build that into the presentation, especially for hardware type products. If it's a software product, you got to be really sure that when you show it, that it's very easy to understand and that it's not going to take up too much of that valuable 5 minutes of presentation time. And here you have to also make very clear what your secret sauce is, right? What is it that you can do or that you are doing that is different from what everybody else is doing, right? And because that's really what the investors really need to know, right? And as I said before, your investor pitch is about selling the company. You're not trying to sell the product to the audience, right? So you don't have to go into a full sales pitch on the product. You just got to give them a bit of flavor and sense of what that product is and what it does without spending too much time on it. This is probably the area that most entrepreneurs fail at when they're pitching to investors, because typically they spend way too much time on this and go into way too much detail. All right, so this is really where you want to try to limit yourself and your own enthusiasm and just focus on, okay, let me just make it very clear what we do and then move on to talk about the rest of the market opportunity and investor interest areas. So that kind of segues into the next step. So now that people understand the problem you're solving and how you're going to solve it, now it really becomes a matter, especially for investors, on how big is this market? Like, is this a $10 million business or a $10 billion business that we potentially are investing in? All right, so you need to describe the segment of the market that you're addressing and how big is that? Like, how big is that within Canada, in North America, globally? Provide some specifics, right? And don't try to make the market bigger than it is. If your solution is a subset of a bigger market, you can mention that bigger market. Like e-commerce, for example, is a giant market. But if you're doing e-commerce in a very specific niche market, you need to figure out what the size is of that. Right? So don't try to make it bigger than it really is by really matching it to your target customers. So now that investors are hopefully excited about how big this opportunity can be if you execute well and your product is successful, now you need to really make sure that they understand where you are relative to competitors. And this is probably the single most important part of your presentation, because if you can't make it clear how you're going to differentiate yourself from existing competitors, it's going to be really difficult to get investors interested in taking the risk of investing in you. Right? So you have to basically really know your competitors inside out, and this is direct competitors, so people that do something the same or similar, but also alternatives, right? Like are people doing solving the problem in an alternative way that you would be competing with because you're providing a different solution to solve that same problem, right? So you have to really sort of make sure you cover all the bases, and then you have to drill down in trying to communicate to the investors what makes you different, right? And the easiest way is by taking typically one or two key aspects of what it is that you do, two areas that you're trying to differentiate yourself, right? And I'll give an example afterwards, but once you kind of pick two features or two things within your solution that are your differentiators, you can now map that out in a 2x2 kind of quadrant of competitors that do it better or worse than you, and hopefully you will, of course, bubble to the top. All right, and here you have to be realistic, right? You have to basically know for sure that you are differentiated that way, and know your competitors. But you can also say that, for example, if you have a first product, a first release, you may not have all the differentiators built in yet, but you can say we have a roadmap that's going to increase differentiation over time, and make that clear, right? So you don't have to have the ultimate solution from day one. You can say, hey, we have a plan in place to first differentiate on this aspect, but then we're going to build out other aspects of the product. And the one thing that you never ever want to say is that you don't have competition. The minute you say that, or the minute you think that, you're going to basically lose any investor interest, right? Because there's always a way that people are doing what you're trying to get them to do with your product. And typically this goes to the alternatives, right? So if there's no competitor that's doing the same solution that you're doing, that doesn't mean you don't have competition, right? If people have a problem, they are solving it one way or the other. So you have to very clearly identify that in the alternative competitors. But yeah, never say that you don't have competition, because what's going to happen is that investors are going to pull out their smartphones, they're going to do a Google search, and they're going to find three ways that three companies that are providing competitive solutions to yours, right? And you lose all your credibility. So make sure you've done your competitive research, that you really know your competitors inside out, and that you can talk intelligently about it, and that you're realistic in comparing yourself to them. So let's look at an example of a competitive quadrant in this case. So this is actually for Airbnb, which originally was called Air Bed and Breakfast. So you see them at the top right. And you can see that they took two key aspects that they wanted to differentiate themselves on, right? So they wanted to provide affordable accommodations, right? So that's the vertical axis, affordable versus expensive accommodation. And then they also wanted to do a solution that completely has all the transactions online, right? So there's a lot of hybrid solutions where part of the transaction is done online, or there's a bunch of competitive solutions to them that were actually the transaction, so the payment had to be done offline. So they identified those two aspects as the primary ways that they were going to differentiate, affordable accommodation where the transaction is completely done online over the internet. And if you've used Airbnb, you realize that they've actually grown into that that value proposition. And you can see here that they compare themselves at the time. This must have been a few years ago to the key competitors that they were facing against, right? Things like Craigslist, Hotels.com. So they kind of mapped this out, and you can see that they were actually identified Hostels.com as a competitor that was trying to do the same thing. But given where Airbnb is today, I assume that they execute a lot better than Hostels.com because they pretty much cornered off this part of the market. So this kind of slide, this kind of comparison on these two big differentiators makes it really easy for investors to understand where you are and where your competitors sit, and then they can make a judgment call on whether or not they believe that you're going to have enough differentiation to be successful in this market, competing against these other companies. So this is so the first part is really sort of setting the stage for the investors to understand what it is that you're doing and the markets that you're going to be operating in. Then they're going to want to learn a little bit more about the specifics of your company. One thing, especially in technology, is the business model, right? So how do you make money? Are you going to be selling a product? Are you going to sell a service? If you sell a service, is it one time? Is it a subscription? It's really important to know how you intend to monetize, what's called monetizing your customers, right? How are you going to get money out of your customer base for your solution, right? If it's an online solution or an app, you can have advertising as a strategy. You don't have to be ashamed of it. You just need to very clearly state to the investors, this is how we plan to monetize. And hopefully you've already done a bit of a prototype and you've had some early customers that have proven that you can monetize customers that way and that people are willing to pay for it. But if not, you're going to have to hopefully provide some other research that shows that, hey, if we build this product, people are going to be willing to pay this much money for it, right? And of course, the business model, how do you make money and how you price your product, very much depends on the competition, right? You're going to have to compare that to competitors. If they have a certain model, then you may need to follow that, or you need to make some, or you might want to do something completely different than what they do. But yeah, you have to have a good understanding of, in the end, how are you going to extract money out of your customers, because that's what every business is based on. All right. So as I said, if you have customers already, if you've built a prototype, if you've done an early release, if you've built some sample products, if you've been selling them, right? Whether that's selling them online, whether that's selling them at farmers markets, it's like it doesn't matter. Have you been able to sell this product to customers? That is great, right? That's called traction. That basically tells the investors that, hey, this product is not just something that I thought of. We've tested this and people are willing to pay for it, right? And if that's the case, you need to share the data on that, right? So how many customers bought this, or how many users do you have and how many did you convert to paying customers? What is the revenue that you got out of that? Right? Like how many did you sell at what price? How fast are you growing? Right? So if you've been at it for a while, if you've been increasing your sales month over month, that's a great statistic to have, because people can extrapolate from that. And really know all of those relevant metrics that comes to running your business and making the money and keeping the cost in check, right? So how expensive is it to acquire customers, right? How many of your customers do you convert from visiting your website to buying the product, or how many customers that looked at the product ended up buying it versus walking away from it? What was your cost of goods sold? It depends on your business, of course, what the key metrics are. But you, as the business owner, the operator, you need to know those metrics pretty much inside out to be able to make a good impression on investors. Right? So be prepared to answer detailed questions on your sales, on your revenues, and on your cost when you're standing in front of investors. So towards the end of the pitch, you need to also start making it clear to the investors what you're looking for, right? If you're there looking to raise money, you need to say how much you are raising, and you need to let investors know what do they get in return, right? And this is where you need to be familiar with the investment terms, like things like pre-money valuation, convertible notes, things like that. The more savvier the investors are, the more you need to be just as savvy to understand how the investors actually put money into a company and what do they expect in return, what percentage of the company do they get, what's the valuation, things like that, right? So you need to make it clear. Now, in some cases, if you're in front of a group of people, you may not necessarily be looking for money. You may be looking for people to join your advisory board. You may be looking for mentors. You might be looking for key staff members, like a senior staff member, right? So that's also okay, right? If you're there to do networking and make connections to get introduced to the right people to help you grow your business, that's an alternative ask than just looking for money. And then you also have to let the investors know what you plan to do with the money, right? Because ultimately they're going to invest in you to help you grow. So you need to have a very good understanding of what are you going to use the funds for, right? Is it to hire staff? Is it to build the product? Is it to do marketing? Is it to invest in the distribution channel? What will you use the funds for? And then also, how will you execute on the growth plan, right? Like what are the things you're going to be doing in the next 6, 12, 18 months to grow your business and to be able to grow the business to provide a return on the investment of the investors. So those are really the basics. The next few ones are a little bit more optional. So one of the things that I often recommend is that if you have a sales forecast and you typically create a slide that says, hey, over the next 3 years, we're going to grow from $100,000 in revenue to $10 million in revenue, right? That's great to have. But it is a slide that you could actually keep in your backup deck, because if you do not include this in your initial pitch, if an investor is actually interested in your business, this is going to be the first thing they're going to ask for, right? They're going to say, hey, what's your forecast, right? It's like, how fast are you going to grow? And then you can show that slide in the Q&A session, right? So if you're running out of time, if your presentation is getting a bit too long, just create a slide, but put it in the back, address it during the question and answer period. All right. Now, if you create a slide, make sure it is realistic, because I've seen too many slides where people are going to go from $0 in revenue to billions of dollars in revenue in a very short time, and it's just not realistic, right? You have to have a growth plan that you know you can scale into, that you know you can execute on, because otherwise you're going to lose a lot of respect from the investors and a lot of credibility if you're overly optimistic. Another slide that's good to have is who is on your team. To me, it's also an optional slide. It really depends a bit on the strength of the people on your team. If you're an early stage startup with a lot of young people involved that haven't really been through the motions of starting and growing a business yet, I would put it in the backup slide. But if you have some really strong people on there that are serial entrepreneurs and that have the respect in the investment community, then you want to show it, because in the end, the investors that you're pitching to are more likely to invest in the people running the business than in just your product idea, right? So if it's a strong and relevant team, you might want to bring it up. Otherwise, it's again something that anybody that's interested is going to ask the question, okay, besides you, Mr. CEO, pitching to me, who else is on your team? And then you can show this slide. One way, so this is getting towards the very end before the Q&A. If you are very clear on what your likely exit plan is, then you might want to include that as a slide. The exit is really, okay, in the end, if I'm going to be an investor, I put money in your company, am I going to get my money back because you're going to get acquired? Am I going to get my money back because you're going to start paying me a dividend? am I going to get my money back because you're going to go public? What is your intended exit plan? So it's really about intentions. Usually you're a few years away from an exit, but you might want to say, hey, we plan to go public, or we plan to get acquired. And that's when it's key to know the comparables in the industry, right? So if within your industry that you're operating in, if there's a few big companies buying up a lot of startups, and you have some of those examples available, that's great to share, right? Because if, let's say, your strategy is that, hey, we're going to grow this business, and then one of the big players in the market is going to acquire us, you want to show that that's what these big players have been doing. If companies are creating successful businesses that become that go public, you want to show those examples. But if you have this information, it's good to show. If you don't have a lot of data on this, or don't have a really good, clear understanding on it, then I would not include this slide initially, but address it if somebody asks us in a Q&A portion of your presentation. And like I said, the thing you always have to keep time for, right, and you have to make sure that you don't run over your time, is to allow questions from the audience, right? Because that's how you're going to gauge interest. That's how you're going to learn what resonates with people, what piques the interest of investors. So you have to keep time for this, and that's why you need to know in advance exactly how much time you have for your entire pitch and how much time you have for Q&A, and balance that out. Now, it can be very stressful to take questions from an audience, because you're going to have to answer them on the spot, right? But you know more about your business than the audience does, and hopefully you know the state of your business, right? So before you go and pitch, you want to check how many customers do we have, right? Like, what's the latest news? What's the latest buzz? What are the latest pieces of data that I need to know, and be ready with that. And some of that can be in your backup slides. Some of that you're just going to have to know and address if people ask. Like I said, you got to know your metrics. The nice thing about the Q&A session is that you can refer to your backup slides. You can refer to a cheat sheet if they drill down into very specific metrics. But you got to make sure that you're able to answer those. I've talked about this. Now, the key thing is that you don't have to be able to answer every single detailed question. You've got to be honest, and you've got to be humble. And if they ask you questions that you don't really know the information about, you just have to acknowledge that, right? Saying like, well, we have not bumped into that before. I haven't really thought about that too much. But let me get your business card, and I'll get back with an answer to you afterwards, right? So you should be able to answer probably 7 or 8 out of the 10 questions. But the 1 or 2 questions that are out of left field, don't feel obliged to come up with an answer or make up an answer. Just tell people, sorry, I don't have that information right now, but if you give me your card, I'll make sure that we're going to get back to you with information on that. So that was a lot about the content. So the last portion of the seminar is a bit about how do you now present your pitch when you go in front of an audience, right? And the first thing here to remember is that investors don't like bacon, right? And what do I mean by that is that there's a saying that if you put lipstick on a pig, it is still a pig, right? So you can make a presentation look really good. You can be the best presenter out there, tell a really slick story. If ultimately the product that you've created or the market that you're targeting, if it's not really the right thing for investors, or it's not really going to resonate with them, or it might be just a really bad idea, no matter what you do from a presentation skills perspective, you're not going to make it any more attractive to investors, right? So make sure that you validated the market opportunity, and that you know that your product really solves a problem that people are willing to take money for, pay money for, before you go in and present to investors. And if not, investors are going to be very honest, and they're going to tell you that it's not a great idea, right? So, but just keep that in mind. So with that said, I'm going to go into to some tips in general about how to present in front of an audience, and they all apply to pitching to investors for sure. So the first one is that presenting this kind of information, it's actually a skill that you can develop through practice, right? The more you practice, the more you do this, the better you will get at presenting this information, right? So the first thing you want to do is just practice for yourself, right? So go stand up in your office, turn on your smartphone and put it on voice record, and just do the presentation as if you're in front of an audience, but behind closed doors, so you don't embarrass yourself, right? Tape yourself, and then afterwards listen to it, and you will pick up where do you stumble, right? Where does it not sound very natural? Where's the flow kind of broken? And then you adjust that, right? And you make some changes in how you talk about the different slides, or you change some content in the slides, or you change the order. But just practice, and don't just do this once. Do this 3, 4, 5 times at least to yourself, right? That's an investment of maybe an hour worth of work, but this is a pretty important thing that you need to get good at, and where you need to make sure that when you're presenting in front of investors that you're going to make a good impression. So practice. When you get in front of an audience, the biggest flaw that I've seen is that people read from a piece of paper. They read what is on the slides, or something that's new is that people actually read from their smartphone. Anytime you have to read what it is that you're presenting, it sends a very big signal to the investors that A, you don't really know your business, and B, you're not very good at selling your company, or which means you're not going to be very good at selling your product either, right? So you have to get to a confidence level where you can present this by referring to the slides, but telling a story instead of reading it from a script, right? And this goes back to the first step. That's just a matter of practicing and getting your confidence level up, right? Also, when you're standing and presenting to an audience, don't turn around and look at your beautiful slides and then read to the slides. You got to face the audience, right? They'll be looking at your slides, but you need to be looking at the audience, right? So you can engage with them, you can read their responses, and they can hear you better because your voice is going to be pointing that way, right? So avoid turning your back and looking at the screen. Always keep facing forward. Very basic tip, but I've seen it not done many times. So this is probably the one where most people are going to stress out on it. If you're not strong at presenting publicly, you might rush yourself, right? So you always just have to tell yourself, just relax. You know more about the business than the audience. If you make a mistake, you likely will know, but they probably won't know because they don't know what it was supposed to be, what you tell them. So just relax and also slow down, right? So don't try to do 15 slides in 5 minutes. Keep it to 5, 6, 7, 8 slides, right? So you don't have to rush yourself, and keep the content down. You don't want to just talk fast to get more information, and that defeats the point. So take some breaks at the end of a sentence. Take a couple of seconds to have a pause at the end of a slide deck or at the end of a paragraph. Just take some breaks so that the audience can process what you told them, and they can catch up and be ready for the next piece of information you're going to share with them. All right. So again, this is a matter of practicing. And when you practice, of course, keep track of the time that you spend on each piece of content. But you have to be able to present relatively slow and allow your audience to catch up to what you've just told them. So practice, right? So I can't emphasize this enough. The next thing you want to do after you've practiced this in front of a mirror in your office is to actually go and present this in front of people and get their feedback on it, right? And you want to do this with a trusted circle of people at this stage. So maybe to your colleagues, maybe to some family members. You just want to sort of practice your presentation in that safer environment where you can make some mistakes. But then you also want to hear from the audience the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So make sure that you have a trusted relationship the people you practice at this stage at, to have them tell you where things don't make sense, where the language is kind of very, very jargony, so they didn't understand it, where there's information that's on the slide that's not very clear. So you just want to get their honest feedback as much as you can at this stage. But yeah, go in front of people, have them time you, have them videotape you, and then have them give you feedback, so you can kind of get some really good feedback and realistic experience of presenting in front of a group of people. Now back to the presentation. So if you have the opportunity, and in most cases you will, because it's going to be fairly small audiences, don't just sit down. That's the worst case. Or don't just stand behind the presentation desk. If you have a mobile clicker and a mobile microphone, just walk around a little bit around the audience. It's going to give you a lot more energy. It's gonna give you a lot more interaction with the audience, and it's going to look a lot more dynamic. All right, so stand up, face the audience, walk around a bit, and look at different parts of the audience. It ties into the next step, which is you have to show that you're energetic and that you have passion for the business, right? And sitting down or standing still is not going to convey that, right? Now, this step might go a little bit against the relax and slow down, but just because you're slowing things down doesn't mean you can speak with passion, you can speak with energy, you can have some intonation, you can have a strong voice. You have to show that, hey, I'm an energetic, passionate guy about this business. I want you as an investor to come along for the ride with me, right? So you have to be able to project that as you're presenting to the audience. Now, this tip is very practical. It does two things, right? So anytime you create slides, the minimum font size should be 24. The recommended is actually font size 30, which is pretty damn big, right? It's bigger than the text on these slides. It does two things. One, to be a little bit of an older audience, right? Because they're people with money. So having a larger font size allows them to read the slides a lot better. It also forces you to not put too much information on the slides, right? If you put too much information on the slide, chances are you're going to look at the slide and you're just going to read what is on the slide, right? Which defeats the purpose of a presentation, because then you might as well just email me the deck and I'll read the deck. You want to have some key reminders and some key points on the slides, but you want to be telling the full story to the audience as part of your presentation. So using a large font size is going to limit the number of words you can put on the slide, which is going to help you get there. It also matters how your deck looks, right? So you want to have somebody that has a good sense of making slides look nice, look professional, and look clean. Look at your slides, right? Not everybody is great at PowerPoint. Not everybody has a great sense of style and look and feel. So you want to pull in somebody that has that if that's not part of your key skill set, right? So make sure your slides look good, because again, it's about making impressions. So you do have to have a professional looking deck that conveys that information very clearly. So at the end of the presentation, as I said, you're going to be doing Q&A with the audience, right? So if somebody in the audience asks a question, what you want to do is you want to repeat that question to the rest of the audience, right? So you want to say like, okay, thank you for the question, sir. I believe you asked me X, Y, Z. Is that correct? The person is going to confirm it. And because you've repeated the question, everybody else in the audience will have heard it very clearly. And it also gives you some time to come up with the right answer, right? So many times the audience is not facing the audience, right? So when they ask you the question, and they don't have a microphone, the rest of the audience doesn't know what question you're going to be answering. So repeat it, buy some time, and then answer the question. And at the end of it, you want to go back to the person that asked the question and basically ask them, did that answer your question? If they say yes, or if they nod, you can move on and take the next question. Now, if it didn't answer that question and you feel like it's sort of dragging everything down, you can also option to say, hey, let's take this offline after the presentation, right? We'll sit down and drill down into the specifics, because you don't want to go into a very specific question in too much detail if the rest of the audience is not that interested in it. So these are my top 10 presentation tips. I have one bonus one. Should not be a surprise that it's again about practicing. So first I said to practice just for yourself, right? So there's no feedback there. Then the second practice is in front of a group of trusted people, right, where you can practice in a safe environment. But to really practice your presentation, you need to go out and do it with some strangers, basically, right? So people that don't know you, that you can present this to and get their honest feedback. Sometimes there's some places where you can practice your presentations, like Toastmasters can help you with that, right? But you can just ask your neighbor, right? It's like your neighbor, you don't really have, unless they're a really good fan, but get some people that are a little bit arm's length removed from your business, that you can still trust, but where you can really get some feedback on, like, hey, is what I'm talking about, is it going to make sense to you? How does it sound, right? So kind of broaden your range of practice. And then, of course, then you go out and pitch to actual investors, which anytime you do it, make sure that you also take notes and be able to improve your deck for the next time you're presenting to other investors, right? So again, it's a living thing. It's not a one-time production. Every time you present this, you're going to get feedback. You're going to learn a little bit more about what investors look for, and you're going to keep improving your presentation. So those are my tips for presenting your pitch to investors. So that kind of wraps up the content portion of the investor pitch. Now, as an entrepreneur, as a startup founder, you may need help with this, right? And there's actually a lot of resources across the country to help you with getting ready to present to investors. And typically, you'll find that in the form of an accelerator. And what they do is they actually first help you prepare the pitch by focusing on the content, right? In many cases, they will run programs that force you to go do some market research and go to talk to some potential customers to validate the problem, go do some research on who your competitors are and really drill down on that, figure out what pricing model you could do. The end goal of that is to create what's called a lean canvas business model, right? It's kind of a mini business plan that captures all that information, and it matches up very well with what you want to put in an investor pitch to pitch to investors, right? A lot of these accelerators also have mentors on staff that can review your pitch and can work with you on it. Often they come in the form of what's called an executive in residence. So these are former executives, people that have done startups and are now part of these accelerators to help new startups grow and get better at what they're doing. So they're great people to pull in and practice your pitch on, or collaborate with to review the content of your pitch. And then have a local network of investors that they can introduce you to, or where they invite the investors and provide pitching opportunities, right? So these accelerators, there's many of them. These are just a few of them across the country. They are often subsidized by government, right? So by provincial or federal government programs. So a lot of their services are either free or at very reasonable cost, specifically targeted at startups, right? So I would seek them out and see what programs they offer and see how they help you. In my role as part of the concierge service, I work with a lot of early stage startups that I refer to local accelerators, right? The group of advisors across the country that are part of the concierge service know all of these accelerators very well, so we can help you find them and get introduced to you and hook you up with the right kind of program that is the best fit for you. But this is a great resource that I highly recommend if you're in that early stage startup where you're looking to get ready to pitch to investors. Now, if you need more help, as I said, I'm part of the Concierge service, which is a free service for innovative small businesses in Canada, offered by the federal government. So you can contact us, and myself and my colleagues across the country, we are there to help you, and we can help you review your pitch, right? We can also help you find matching government grants. So once you get investors to put money into the company, you want to maximize the government grants that you take advantage of. So you can meet with us and we'll tell you what the best options are there. We also have networks in place, so we can connect you to pitching opportunities, introduce you to investment networks. And again, all of this is a free service. I recommend that if you are at that stage, that you contact the Concierge service, call this number, visit our website, and we will take down the information and you'll get introduced to a local innovation advisor that's part of the Concierge team. And we will sit down with you to look at your business, look at what you need help with, and support you to grow through your innovation and new products that you're developing. So with that, I would wrap up the presentation. I will get it back to the moderator and see if there's any questions that the audience has about this content.
Thank you very much, Erik. Those are some very helpful insights. We're going to open it now to a little bit of a Q&A. First question, many people, they get nervous when they're pitching. So I wanted to see if you had some advice for helping those nerves to go away.
Yeah, so that ties back to that those presentation tips. I think that mostly comes down to practice. And then the two parts of the practice one is just knowing your content, right? So having that level of confidence that you know what you're talking about. But the other part of practice is if you're not used to presenting to audiences, really the only way to get good at it is by doing it, right? So you want to start doing it in safer environments, things like Toastmasters, things like these accelerators will often provide these opportunities to practice your pitch. And that's really the way to get better at it over time. And that's going to take away the nerves. Now, if that all doesn't work and you're just not a good public presenter, you may start looking at a co-founder or somebody else in the company that could do the pitching instead, right? I mean, if it's just not your forte to do a presentation like that, then you have to acknowledge that and bring in somebody that has that skill set.
Right, and just to follow up from that, how do you know when your pitch is ready to go in front of actual investors? Like, how do you know when you're ready to go?
That's a tougher question, of course, because it depends mostly on the content. But I would say that if you're working with an accelerator or working with an innovation advisor, I think they'll be able to give you a good sense that, hey, you've got the right information to present to investors. So yeah, you're going to have to pull in somebody that can give you an indication of that. But yeah, if you cannot answer the questions that I discussed in this presentation in details and cannot sort of put that together as a good story, then you probably shouldn't go in front of investors yet. So build that framework of baseline content first, based on the guidelines provided today. And once you have that, then you can start looking at maybe having somebody review it to confirm and validate that's going to be something that's going to resonate with investors and it's going to give them the information to make decisions on.
Right. What's the biggest mistake that you've seen in your experience entrepreneurs making when it comes to making their pitch?
The biggest mistake, the two big mistakes are lack of competitive information, right? So you have to know your competitors, whether they're direct competitors or alternatives, because if you cannot talk about that, you're going to lose a lot of credibility. And ultimately, if you don't know your competitors, you're very unlikely to be successful in business. The second mistake is too much details on the product, right? It's very easy to get very excited about your product in front of other people, and that passion is great to have. But in front of investors, you want to limit it to just giving them enough information so they know what your product is, but not spending too much of your time on talking about the product.
Can we drill into that a little more? How do you know what the essentials are for that people need to know? Because you know a lot more about it than your investors do. Like, how do you figure out that sweet spot?
Yeah, I think that comes down to purely being able to, in a very short amount of time, make clear what your product does and how it's differentiated. If that takes you more than 1 minute, you're probably spending too much time on it. Again, it depends a little bit on the product that you're pitching. If it's a hardware type product, a show and tell could be enough to kind of say like, hey, this is what it does and this is why it's different. If it's more of a software type product, then showing a couple of screenshots and talking about how your product would be used should be enough. But yeah, if it goes more than 1 minute, it would take up too much time of your investor pitch. So try to get that pitch down within 1 minute to show and tell people what your product does. And then always talk about how it's differentiating versus competition rather than just going down a long list of features, right? The features are not important. It's what makes your product different and differentiated to your competitors. That's what you want to focus on.
Right. What's your take on props?
Pardon?
Props. Your take on using props and
props in the pitch?
Yeah.
I would only use it if it's to support your product demo part, right? So keep it simple. Don't go too wild. But if it helps in within that 1 minute, tell people what your product does, that can be useful, right? Especially if it's a hardware product.
Right. We've got a question from Twitter here. Barry is asking, at what point do you need a non-disclosure agreement?
With investors, so anytime you're pitching in public, right? So if it's a pitching event where there's an audience of investors, you're not going to get a non-disclosure agreement. So don't share anything that's proprietary. Keep it very general. Non-disclosures come into place if you have a follow-up meeting with an individual investor, and if that investor wants to do due diligence on your specific technology, you may need to put in a non-disclosure agreement. But I would suggest in general that if you're talking to investors, you should not give away too much information because a lot of them don't want to sign a non-disclosure agreement, right? So you got to be able to talk about your business and your unique technology, even if you haven't signed a non-disclosure. Now, if you're talking to a larger company that might want to invest in you or potentially acquire you, then you want to bring in a lawyer, right? And really make sure that your bases are covered. Because even though you sign a non-disclosure agreement, if you're a small startup dealing with a bigger entity, in the end, you're not going to have the funds to be able to legally defend that non-disclosure agreement, right? So you just got to use very common sense in being able to know what you can disclose and not disclose in that situation. But always err on the side of not disclosing too much if you don't have the ability to defend or take legal action and go after the people that are infringing on your IP.
Do you have any final tips on how startups can prepare to pitch to investors? You gave us a lot of really good ones. Is there any other ones that you could add?
Well, I think I put it all in the presentation. So the big challenge, of course, is that this is a very general presentation. So it really boils down to what is your company and what stage are you at. So the next level of tips would probably be specific to a presentation, and that's a pitch review, right? So if you're based in Vancouver, you can contact the concierge service and we can sit down and review it. If you're based across anywhere else in Canada, contact the concierge service and one of my colleagues can sit down and do a quick review. And that's when you're going to get the most value and additional tips on how to improve your specific presentation in a one-to-one setting. So that would be probably our next big tip, is that bring in people to get feedback, right? I've seen too many entrepreneurs that think that they know everything about their business and they can create a great pitch. But the risk there is that you know too much about it. So you want to kind of get that independent third-party voice to kind of tell you, hey, even though you think this sounds great, this would really improve making it clear to people what you're doing, right? And take away some of those issues around having too much insight into the company almost. So yeah, bring in people to ask for feedback, right? And then listen to them and adapt your presentation based on that feedback.
Okay, well, that was great. I want to thank you very much, Erik, for spending some time with us today and for being a valued guest on Startup School at Startup Canada. Thank you very much, man. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Also, a huge thank you to Concierge Service for presenting this week's class. You can learn more about Concierge at www.nrc-cnrc.ga/eng/IRAP/concierge. Join us next week for hashtag Startup School on September 27th, when we will be talking about managing risk and protecting your advice in partnership with True Shield Insurance. Need more startup inspiration? Join us this Wednesday at noon for Startup Chats, when we'll be discussing an important topic, tips for moving from startup to scale up. And of course, don't forget to tune in on Friday for another Startup Chats on increasing cash flow for your business. Thanks again, everyone, and have an enterprising week.